in Sudan, the African Union has reiterated its call for a permanent ceasefire. Its chairman, Mr. Moussa Mahamat says he is still monitoring the plight of civilians caught up in the deadly conflict. He is calling on the Sudanese neighbours to intervene. Well, let's give you a reaction on this story now. And we're joined by a Sudanese national living in South Africa, Professor Amira Osman. She's from the Tshwane University of Technology. Professor, thank you very much for your time. And it must be a difficult moment for you and your family that's in South Africa. Do you still have family in Sudan?
We have, of course, a lot of family, friends, neighbours that are impacted in very major ways by this crisis.
How would you describe this situation right now? I'm sure you are in contact with them. What are they saying?
Yes, so I listen with interest at when they say there's a ceasefire, because we get news from the ground. From family members and friends, and the fighting just doesn't seem to have stopped at all. People are terrified and terrorized in their homes. Many people have evacuated their homes, literally just carrying what they can. They've just left everything behind and tried to go to either small towns outside of the capital city. Some of them have gone north to the border with Egypt. We've lost contact with some of them, so we don't know whether they're stranded at the border, whether they've gone into Egypt. Some people have gone to Port Sudan on the Red Sea. Some people have gone south. Some people have gone to the borders with a town called Kassala, the borders with Ethiopia. Some people are trying to get into Ethiopia, and the situation is really unbearable for many that have not been able to leave because they have elderly people at home, they have small children, they don't have the resources to leave.
The daily struggles of people in Sudan, Professor, you mentioned that some of them have to make these long journeys. Not so long ago, we were listening to an international organization talking about how the food situation is quite urgent in Sudan, but also disease is another major factor. Just describe the daily struggles of people.
I mean, it's an absolute nightmare. I keep saying it's worse than our worst nightmare. Many hospitals have been hit. Many hospitals are not functional. People that are on long-term medication or needing dialysis or needing urgent surgical procedures, they're unable to access those services. People unable to get hold of medication. And it was kind of brewing for a long time, but it still hit people very suddenly and very hard. So there was no preparation in advance. In terms of the day-to-day struggles, we, as an example, are unable to transfer money into Sudan. I've tried. It's almost impossible. People have money in their bank accounts. Sometimes the bank apps just do not work. People are unable to get hold of Sudanese cash. Some people have jewelry and they have dollars. And I'm talking about the wealthier segments of society. I cannot even imagine what is happening to the poorer segments of society that rely on day-to-day income. I'm expecting that food and water supplies are going to run dry. And people also have missing people, families that have been broken up. They can't get to each other. And children literally just traumatized by what's happening, and people that are just stuck at home because they have, as an example, a very old person that they can't move. And they have to then stay in these very dangerous conditions.
I'm going to ask you in a moment about what started this. For South Africans who may not be familiar with the story, it'll be important to paint that context. But I wanted to understand from you, as you paint the conditions on the ground, what would your message be to authorities, not just in Sudan, but international organizations. We're talking, for example, the African Union, which is calling for a permanent ceasefire. I'd like to understand from you where you think the priorities are at the moment. We know that there's been lots of talk about evacuating diplomats and foreign nationals, but the people of Sudan, those are the people that I suspect are suffering the most.
Absolutely. I mean, for me, the priority is humanitarian. As Sudanese, we very much feel that we are at the mercy of powers beyond our control. I know that and I refer to myself as Sudanese South African. I've been in South Africa for well over 25 years, and I consider it home. But for us, Sudan, and specifically for me, Khartoum is home base. It's where the family home is. It's where we go for reunions, and it's very much home. The crisis is humanitarian. I just want to paint a picture of the paramilitary being on the ground in small vehicles, on foot, with weapons, hiding in the neighborhoods, under trees. We get photographs on WhatsApp of the paramilitary troops, the rapid support forces, being on the ground in Khartoum.
Yeah, yes? Let me pause you there, Prof. When South Africans are listening to you talking about the paramilitary, are these the people that are referred to as the rebels, and they are fighting with the official army of Sudan?
Absolutely, absolutely. So they are on the ground in strategic locations, but in residential areas. I really want people to understand that they're on the ground in residential areas, in between houses, and the army is fighting them mostly from the air. So normal neighborhoods, normal people, innocent people in their homes.
Being used as human shields.
They're being used as human shields. That's the situation currently in Khartoum and in many regions, spreading from the center of the country, the Khartoum region, spreading west right up to the borders with Chad. That's the area that is mostly affected now, and people are losing their lives daily because of this and losing property, and the destruction is actually very difficult to comprehend.
Yeah. I said earlier we were going to ask you to paint the picture of what exactly started this. For a South African who is completely unfamiliar with what is going on in Sudan, paint that picture.
Yeah.
What started this, and was it sudden?
It was sudden, and it wasn't sudden. As all issues, there's multiple layers to it, and it's complex. It was sudden in the sense that I was in Khartoum in January. I still felt safer in Khartoum than I do in Johannesburg in January. And so it really hit people very hard. But it wasn't sudden in the sense that if we go back even to the 2000s, when the Darfur crisis was happening, and these paramilitary groups, the rapid support forces, emerged during that time. And I'm going to say this very briefly in terms of the multitude of reasons why this is happening. Darfur is referred to some as being the first climate change war that ever happened, the crisis and the genocide that happened in Darfur. There's also the migration issue. I mean, I'm very interested to know more about how the European Union, as an example, in trying to control migration into Europe, has had some impact on what's happening in that region and the development of these troops. There's also issues around gold. One of the things for me as an architect and as an urbanist that I've been saying for a few years now is the most significant urbanization patterns that have been happening in Khartoum have been around areas of where there's concentrations of gold and like almost an informal gold mining industry.
Yeah.
So these rapid support forces also have access to immense wealth in terms of the gold. Of course, there's also the oil issue that was also one of the aspects that led to a lot of disputes in that region. And there are, of course, international and regional forces that have interests in the oil, in the gold, in the water resources. This is a problem of great proportions, and that's why I say for the normal Sudanese person on the ground, it's almost like a force that we are just pawns in this larger geopolitical game.
And you may possibly listen to my view as possibly very simplistic, but I listened to a channel last night, an international news channel, and someone described the situation there in its simplest form as basically a fight for political power, but also the control of the resources of Sudan. Is that the simplistic version of it?
Absolutely. So what happened is during the Darfur crisis, this paramilitary group, the Rapid Support Forces, they became stronger and stronger, and now they are almost equal, not 100% equal, but almost equal to the official Sudanese army. So we have ended up with a situation where there are two military forces fighting for power. There's several scenarios that might happen. One of them might be that both of them realize that they're not going to win this war, so they have to go to the negotiating table. That's one scenario. The other scenario is that the Rapid Support Forces wins this war, and we don't know what it will be like for us as Sudanese with such a force in power. And the third scenario is the army then winning the war. Our sentiments, even though we have very serious reservations about the army and its links to the previous Omar al-Bashir regime, we still prefer that scenario because it's an official body. We don't know what rules govern the paramilitary, so it's a very scary scenario.
You mentioned Omar al-Bashir. That's the former Sudanese president.
Absolutely.
The understanding is that he may have skipped jail. What are you hearing on the ground?
We're hearing that the Kober prison, which is the prison where many political detainees are kept, we've heard that they've just let them out because they say they cannot provide water or food for them, and they cannot ensure their safety. So at the moment, no one really knows what's happening to these political prisoners.
Final question to you. The African Union is calling for a permanent ceasefire, and it's asking the neighbours to also try and intervene. Do you believe in bodies like that? The Sudanese war has been going on for quite a long time. That country is trying to build from that civil war. Where would you, what scenarios are playing out in your mind right now about whether or not regional bodies such as the African Union are genuinely helping in this situation, but also more importantly, economically, your country, is it likely to be more devastated than it was?
Well, we can only hope that it isn't. I really don't know how to answer that question, because for me it's a question of who's benefiting from Sudan's wealth and who's benefiting from this current situation. Because we have to also understand, as an example, that the Rapid Support Forces provide fighters for the Saudi war on Yemen. And I could go on in terms of the various scenarios. So there are people, I mean, that gold is being mined and it's leaving the country and it's benefiting certain powers. So it's, the only thing I can say is that I'm hoping that some sense will prevail, that the humanitarian crisis is addressed. And I think that's as much as I can say, that people, their day-to-day struggles, and I think it's going to get worse because, in simple terms, people are running out of medicine, food, and water. That is the very real crisis that we're going to have to face now.
Professor Amira Osman, she is from the Tshwane University of Technology, and she teaches architecture in that university.